Well, I'd like to tell you about the oldest continuing operating business, retail business in Gallatin and possibly Sumner County, but I'm not sure of that. The thing I am sure about that it is the oldest continuing operating retail business in the city of Gallatin, and that is Perkins Drugs. Perkins Drugs was opened on the square here in Gallatin, over across the street from where I'm sitting, on the west side facing back toward the courthouse in 1895, and it was opened by a man named Claude Perkins. Mr. Claude Perkins operated Perkins Drugs till 1925, when a Mr. A.B. Perkins, known as Bolin Perkins, came here from Hartsville and bought the store from him. It was a real coincidence that his name was Perkins and Mr. Claude's name was Perkins. There was no family connection. So therefore, when it changed hands in 1925, it continued as Perkins Drugs. So Mr. Bolin had one son, and his name was Tommy Perkins. Tommy went to pharmacy school, and after pharmacy school served in the Army and was in Korea. After coming back from Korea, he came back to go in with his father. At that time, Mr. Bolin was getting in fairly bad health, so Tommy pretty much took over the business and was here on the square. In 1963 and 64, Tommy decided that he needed to branch out and open a second store. And he bought some property out on Hartsville Pike from American Oil, and it was there where Perkins is now. At that time, there was nothing out there retail to speak of except a service station that was there in what was called the Triangle, and the hospital, which had just been built a few years before. So we were the first real retail business to venture out of the business district of Gallatin, so to speak. So that became Perkins number 2. I was hired in 1964 to come here. I was working in Lebanon at the time, and I was hired to run the new store, and we had an option that if things went well with Mr. Perkins and things went well with me, we both liked the situation, that I had an option to become a partner. So in 1967, I became a full partner in Perkins Drugs. So Tommy Perkins and myself owned Perkins Drugs from 1967, till in the late 80s, 1988. At that time, Tommy decided it was about time for him to retire. He was ready to kind of slow down and step out. At that time, he and Farrell Hale made a business deal, and Farrell bought Tommy's half of the business. So Farrell Hale and I became partners in 1988. Previous to that, Farrell had been in business with another pharmacist and had been a competitor. But that had changed, and Farrell then became my partner. From 1988, for the next 25 years, Farrell Hale and I operated and ran Perkins Drugs. During that time, prior to Farrell Hale, let me back up a little bit, the store on the square, we closed the store on the square, moved it down to a building on North Water, and was there for a few years, having the store there and on Hartsville Pike as well. Then in the 70s, we purchased the lot next door to the Perkins number 2 at that time, from a Mr. E.M. Starks, that was his home and his photography studio. And that's another legend that somebody needs to tell about in Gallatin, is Mr. Starks was a photographer for many, many years in Gallatin. Anyway, we bought that lot, tore the house down, and enlarged the building, and enlarged it to what is now the gift shop part of the drugstore. At that time, then we closed the store downtown and moved it all out to Hartsville Pike. And we dropped the number 2, and it just became Perkins Drugs. Tommy and I operated the business, as I said, until 1988, and then Farrell and I became partners. About 5 to 6 years ago, I guess now, Farrell and I decided it was time we started making plans for our exit and our retirement. So we hired a young man named Andrew Finney, who was just out of pharmacy school from the University of Tennessee. He was interested in community pharmacy, and we thought we were interested in him. So he came in on a trial basis, much the same as I did when I came here. After a couple of years, it was for sure that Andrew was the young man to take the torch and continue with Perkins Drugs. So he bought half interest in the store, and then 2 years later, he bought the full business. In 1912, he became the full owner of Perkins Drugs, and Farrell and I retired and stepped out. I had set the date of June the 1st for my retirement because that marked my 50 years. I had graduated from pharmacy school in May of 1962, so 2012 marked my 50th year as a pharmacist. And I thought that served as time, and it was time for me to sit back and relax and do a little something besides being in pharmacy. It's been a great thing. Perkins Drugs is just a fixture in Gallatin, and it's been here for so many years that, and I'm proud that I have been a part of it, part of its history. Thank you. An interesting side story to us documenting the age of Perkins Drugs. Back in 1999, 98, 99, I knew that we should be approaching the year of 100 years for Perkins Drugs. So I set out to attempt to document when Perkins Drugs was open in Gallatin, and I researched and I did all kinds of things trying to find out. I went to the archives here, and the ladies there were real helpful. They dug and dug and dug, and they finally came up with a receipt that was written in January of 1900, excuse me. And it documented that this person had bought something from Perkins Drugs the previous year, being 1899. So I thought, okay, I can prove that we were here in 1899. So we set out to celebrate our 100th birthday in 1999. And we did all sorts of things. We had events, we had sales, we had the papers in Nashville came up and did full-page spreads on us, and the local papers did nice publicity for us, and it was kind of a year-long celebration. And in the summer we decided to have a birthday party. So one Saturday afternoon after we closed, the lot next door was vacant, so we had a big tent set up on the lot next door, and we had all sorts of things, and we had dignitaries and politicians that came and spoke, and this, that, and other. And we had a big birthday cake that we cut, and just had a big time with a lot of customers and people. A few years later, a lady from the archives came in the store one day, and she said, "You won't believe what I've just found." They were looking through something that day, and she found the newspaper from 1895, and on the front page there was an article about Claude Perkins opening Perkins Drugs. So Perkins Drugs actually opened in 1895, so when we celebrated our 100th birthday in 1999, we were really already 104 years old and not 100. So that ought to really confuse the historians that find this several years later from now.